This is a video response to the video done with Professor Antoine and DawahFilms, where they talked about um, religion and anti-theism and atheism and the integration of different meta-narratives in the real world. Um, what I was thinking of addressing right off was the just separating out a few different things. First, one can be raised a certain way and that have, deep, long-lasting impact on how they behave, cultural norms and things like that. But I wanted to draw a slight distinction between sort of cultural norms and sort of taboos, or things that people just have a sort of almost emotional gut reaction to, whether it be positive or negative. Like the idea of, most people wouldn't necessarily have to rationalize or explain why they think eating a pet would be, a taboo. Like if Fluffy dies, everyone's going to be revulsed by the idea. In certain families, in certain cultures, they're going to be revulsed by the idea of, trussing Fluffy up and popping her in the oven. That's a very emotional uh, an emotional kind of gut level response to something. But then there's another kind of cultural norm which I think is, let's say, like a rule of conduct that maybe isn't quite so taboo, but people have an emotional attachment to a belief because it was how they were raised, but they don't have a strong emotional attachment. It's more of an intellectual emotional attachment. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but things like, like homosexuality. Some people may have a very strong emotional dislike for it, but most people who are opposed, or who have a problem with, homosexuality, that they're going to say, they're going to have all sorts of rationales for it. It's going to be, and the reason I think for that is because at one point, maybe 30 years ago, people could just react. Most, people who weren't, didn't know any homosexuals, didn't know any gay people, could just sort of react with their sort of basic reaction, but once they became exposed to other people and other ideas, they were, that taboo sense was sort of suppressed, and then they were forced to have to kind of confront the idea of why they were having this response. And so it became an emotional, intellectual kind of a thing, but it was still very much a emotional response. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of define those differences, at least the way I see them, and that may not be the best way to do it, but there's like a kind of gradation there between something that you just out and out are, freaked out by, or you think is wrong, or that you think is unacceptable, and something that you think is maybe wrong or unacceptable, that you justify your position more intellectually about, but ultimately it's a learned behavior. It's not, you wouldn't necessarily arrive at it on your own. Does that make sense? Anyway, moving on to the main point is that I think that it's kind of a chicken and egg thing with regard to, religion, anti-religion, reactionary situations between, theists and non-theists. But that ultimately you're really not going to be able to get away from that human element that basically is finally the one that synthesizes all this information, whether it be emotional, simply cultural, and or intellectual, because there's layers of it. and we synthesize it and come up with a response or an opinion about something. And it's all of this whole column of our experiences and the input from external influences, books and music and culture and ideas and religion and all these things come to, and we synthesize this, but we synthesize it, you know. A good example would be, you could have two siblings growing up in the same household, and let's say one of the parents strongly emphasizes thrift, and as a result, one of the siblings grows up and throughout his or her life is very thrifty, very, economical, very careful with money, doesn't throw anything away. But the other sibling is a spendthrift, doesn't save, doesn't put anything aside. The question is, why? Because we've seen this. This happens all the time. You see siblings that are very different. There's a human psychology there. There's a personal, individual psychology there at work. The external input of the parents coming in and saying, this is how you should do, or this is what I think is the right way to do it, and then the person absorbing that and synthesizing it through like the columns of the various different experiences and realities that they have. One sibling walks away and says, I reject that. I reject it entirely. The other sibling embraces it. But that's an internal psychology that, is going to be hard to unravel, and it's a sort of chicken and egg. When it comes to religion, I don't know that it's necessarily religion that is the problem, and I don't know that it's necessarily the person that's the problem. They're all ingredients. They all make up the outcome. But it's going to be very hard, very tricky to tease out what informs what. What is built upon what, because there's a lot going on. And so rather than try to sit around and I know you guys didn't do this, and I think it was great what you all did, but rather than try to sit around and nitpick, some atheists do this. They want to try to prove that religion is wrong. I think it's fine to have a discussion, and to challenge each other on ideas. But ultimately, if your reasoning for doing that is because you think that religion is the source of all evil, I think that's misguided. But that's just my opinion. I think the better thing is what you guys are doing, which is to sit down and talk about common ground, and talk about how you arrived at it as an individual. Because how you arrive at your beliefs, as I've said before in an earlier video, how you behave really says more about who you are than what you believe or what you purport to believe. Anyway, that's all I had to say, and take care.